Hello, everyone, and welcome to What's Your Game, episode 39. Today we are joined by Degenheim and Dfiance. We will be getting to know those projects as we go through. The whole idea of the space is introduce new games to the audience of gamers. Obviously, we're in Web3, so we will be touching on tokens and NFTs, but our main interest is around gameplay. I'll be the host for the hour and a half, and my cornerstone is this Twitter space where I like to introduce different games, but I then do stuff on YouTube and Twitch all around showcasing the gameplay of different games that I get the opportunity to play. We run a pretty casual stage, so if at any point you have any questions and you want to come up and ask any questions of the projects, just request to speak and we'll pull you up. Just make sure they're actual questions for people, and you're not just coming up making duck noises, which has happened in the past. If you're someone who isn't confident with coming up to speak, I would still recommend coming up to speak. There's so much to learn, and it's really great to connect with people by coming up and speaking, but not for everyone. So in the bottom right-hand corner, there is the speech bubble where you can comment any questions that you go through as well. I'll be pinning to the top a Twitter list, which has all of the projects that we've had up previously. So we're on 39 episodes, 41 weeks, because I did take 2 weeks off, which I'm really excited about. I can't wait to get to 52 weeks. It definitely didn't seem like I didn't plan for it to last that long when I first started it. So I'm really grateful for everyone who keeps coming and listening and all the projects that give me the opportunity to talk to them. And that's why this list is important to me, because it shares what they've been up to. And it's quite a good way of keeping up to date with what everyone's been doing. So I will be pinning that to the top. As we go through, I will be pinning stuff from the other projects as well, just so you get a bit more information. So make sure to keep an eye out on that top bit there as well. And then the final bit on the kind of Twitter admin is, if you like what you're hearing from the projects, make sure to follow them, make sure to join their socials, their Discords, just so you can stay up to date with the projects. So we'll just have a quick update on some of the projects we've had up previously before going to our first guest. So it's been another busy week. We're still very deeply into the bear, but that doesn't seem to be stopping the games. If anything, the momentum I feel is really starting to build with releases of both mints and gameplay. So that's really exciting. And I know my to-play list is getting forever longer. And I'm struggling to kind of keep up. Even playing 2 or 3 different games on a night is taking a while to get the to-do list down, which is a good problem to have. So I'm really happy with it. So we will go through 4 ones that we hear. So we did mention Astromust last week as an update that they've now released their Battle Royale mode. They're going to be having a tournament soon. They were one of our first ever guests with their first game on mobile of building a robot, and they've now released their Battle Royale mode. So it's really exciting to have seen them kind of develop across this 41 weeks that we've kind of been going. So that's definitely one to keep an eye out on. Another update that we've been having. So we previously talked to Ready Player DAO, which is a DAO/guild community, and they've been pushing really hard on supporting creators and running a content creator program. They have been releasing their stats they've been going through, and they've got loads of creators involved with it now. So it's interesting to see kind of how a lot of guilds that previously under the bull market were very much a kind of scholarship model are shifting towards more supporting creators and getting deeper involved with actual games. So I find that quite interesting. It's definitely something worth tracking. Be interesting to see how that progresses when we hit a bull again and the easy money starts coming back in again. And then the final update we will have from, where did it go? There's been so much happening that I've kind of lost it. Last time. I might have to stop because it's disappeared. So Rage Effect is one that we've had up previously, and they've just released some new footage of their gameplay. They previously had a version of the game that I played and created a video on. It had needed some work, and it got panned by one of the review sites, getting a 4 out of 10. They seem to have taken a lot of that feedback on board, and from what I've seen of the new gameplay, they've really tried to improve the game and took that feedback really well. Actually, it's quite good to see a project taking constructive critical feedback and actually using it, rather than what we see in some places where anything negative is marked as FUD. I think without being able to take criticism, you're not going to actually be able to build something that your community wants. So it was really good to see how they've kind of reacted to that. But that will be enough of me flapping my gums around the updates. I have pinned to the top of the list, so if you are interested to tracking all the projects that we've had up, make sure to go and follow that list. Will be adding these projects to the list once we've finished. But now we'll be going over to our first project for the night of Dfiance. And Sebastian, can you answer the key question, which is, what's your game?
First of all, thank you for having us. To put simple, Defiance is a fantasy PvP strategy card game. Basically allows players to play against other players. It's a 1v1 at the moment, where the game is a strategy game, and each player basically comes in with a deck of cards, which is made of NFTs and collectibles. Depending on the way that the player plays his cards at what time, which positions, and whatever synergy those cards have between each other, the outcome of the game is decided, and so is the winner. There's an entire universe around Defiance. It's the game is at the center, but we try to build more than just a game. So we kind of build an entire universe for it, stories, maps, events, battlegrounds, as much essence as possible for players to be able to connect beyond just the game, just beyond just, okay, I have an NFT, that's it. Try to connect to the characters themselves, try to connect to the game, try to the locations themselves. And hopefully, as we build this, we're going to be able to attract players that are there for the game, for the character, for the love, for the universe itself, and not only just for the standard Web3 NFTs and tokens and stuff like that.
No, thanks for that quick update. For those in the audience, I found a extremely attractive streamer who has recorded a video, and I've posted that to the top, which shows some of the gameplay. Fair warning, I am terrible at card games, so some of the video might be quite painful as I try and work out what I'm actually doing. But I did get a chance to play it because I just jumped on randomly.
Sorry, I didn't know how it works. I clicked something to get off of it.
I ended up playing against myself, so I played at 1v1. So I think that added to a little bit of my confusion as well. One thing that kind of did come out while I was playing it was I'm not quite sure what you'd call it, but essentially that the board with how the cards actually interact was quite an interesting mechanic, because I have played quite a few card games at this point. So would you be able to kind of go into a bit more detail around the board, the kind of affinities that you mentioned, and kind of how that works, just to emphasize the differences that it may have from other card games?
Sure. So the concept is that each player has up to a deck of cards, which is made up of up to 39 cards. Those could be unique cards, or this could be multitude of copies within different game limits. So you could have, let's say, a maximum of 3 different copies of a specific card. Now, when the game starts, each player draws 10 random cards from their deck. So depending on, there's also some random effect, although you do decide which cards you do bring to the game, right? So if there's a card that you absolutely never want to have to draw, then you just don't add it to the deck and you'll never have it. with those 10 cards, now you basically need to win. Your goal is to win 2 out of 3 rounds. Now, the trick is that you only get 2 additional cards at the beginning of each round. This means that you have a maximum, let's say that there's 3 rounds total, 1 round for each player, and the round that ends in a tie. Then that basically gives you a maximum of 16 cards to play the entire game. The board itself is it's sort of a battlefield view where you have from a tactical perspective, you have your melee units, brawlers. We call them in the game. We call them brawlers, which are the front lines. You have a row for range units, which would be archers and mages and stuff like that. And you have a row for artillery units, long-ranged artillery. Now, cards can be played. Usually, not all cards, but usually cards can be played only on one row. And that depending on when and which row you play your card, and when you play it, it impacts the total result of the game. So each card has a total power, and the goal for you in order to win a round is to have more attack power, accumulated attack power, than your opponent. Now you can do this by either adding additional attack power to yourself, or by impacting your opponent's total attack power by reducing it or removing cards or whatever. So from a board perspective, there's each player has 3 main rows: melee, range, and artillery, and each player has 2 additional rows, mini rows on the side of the melee row, which are the flank rows. And flanking basically allows you to sort of shift the dynamic of the game by annoying the enemy, I would say. It basically it decides to attack. You can use the flanks to try to attack one of the opponent rows. So assuming that, let's say you play 5 cards in your artillery row, now I could try to attack your artillery row, reduce the total attack power in that row by trying to flank. You can either take that penalty, or you can try to counter flank, basically by deploying your own flanking units. And that's obviously that is a matter of a strategic choice whether or not that's worth it. If you're willing to sacrifice units to basically send them to place them on that flank and maybe lose buffs or just stand the chance to not be able to counterflank me. But assuming that you have the ability, then you can technically counterflank me and either deny the penalty or reverse the penalty. So basically, you would be flanking my unit. And it's a strategy game. So there's many things that you can do within the game that shifts the power of the board. And depending on your cards, but mainly depending on your skill, that's basically what decides the result of the battle. By the way, sometimes it's better to in some situations it's better to lose a round than continue just playing all of your cards.
Definitely on that last point, anyone who's seen me play card games, it's entirely throw out all my cards. And what I found is within the first round, that was quite tight, actually. I don't think I won it. And I can't say I did because I've just pinned the video so people can check. But I did better. But then by the second and third round, I was like, I don't have anything left to do. I'm gonna. And then the other me was in the same position. So I think our attack scores were about 4 times as big in round 1. And then they just kept getting lower and lower because I was just throwing out all my cards.
Mm-hmm.
But by the end of it, I realised what I'd done wrong, and I did see how there would be more tactical ways of doing it. Because at one point, I'd completely powered the other side, so I should have probably just taken it as is rather than keep throwing more and more on. Because essentially, you win the round by big number is biggest, isn't it? Really?
Yeah, definitely. And by the way, sometimes you can also win a round through a tie, right? It's still it is considered both players win a point, and the goal eventually is whoever gets first to 2 points, that's the player that wins. Now, as you mentioned, by the end of the round, by the end of the game, you start realizing, oh wait, I could actually do this, and that is in fact one of the things that happens in the game. That it takes 2-3 games to understand the general flow of the game. Okay, so, okay, oh, okay, this is how it works. We're still working on that to make it more intuitive, more self-explanatory. There's still ways to go, but yeah, all feedback is more than accepted. The game is, by the way, available for anyone to play if you want to, and we're more than happy to get feedback and reviews, even negative ones, whatever is constructive. Everything works.
No, and you've segued me nicely because my next question was going to be kind of what phase of development are you currently in, and what's your timeline looking like?
So we are now sort of an open beta. The game is playable. Anyone that wants to go can just go to Defiance.com, hit play. You play for free, and it will always be for free. Although in this stage we are doing a lot of development, active development. So every week we're releasing new features and a lot of changes. Our goal during this phase is focused on balance. In Defiance, you play as one of the factions, one of the currently four, but three main factions. Um, and each faction has about between 80 to 85 different cards. And one of the challenges that we have is making sure that these factions are balanced. Like every single faction can win against any other faction if the player is good enough, right? And we're trying to do that by basically doing a lot of testing and a lot of balancing and rebalancing. Until now, at least for the time being, it looks like we're pretty balanced. But again, every week we're doing some changes, but on top of all the ongoing development and new features that we constantly are releasing.
No, that makes sense, and I think I've pinned to the top for anyone in the audience. I have pinned to the top a tweet with the link, so you can go and have a look at the game and jump in. Right now, you would need someone to play against, so I'd recommend joining.
Actually, if you
or has you got
if
an
you give
AI
it,
now?
yeah, it's got an AI now. So if you just wait like if you just wait like 30 seconds, if there's nobody live now, you just play against an AI.
Oh, you're ticking off all my questions here. So yeah, I was gonna say I'll still go with my suggestion of try and find a friend to play with as well. So
Yeah, absolutely.
Then you've introduced two people. So I've pinned that to the top for anyone to go and have a jump in. And then you mentioned about free to play, and I'm on the fence about free to play. I keep umming and ahhing, keep arguing myself slightly because I like the idea, and I think for games where you need to reach kind of like a critical mass, so you're actually able to compete against each other. Free to play is a good way of going into it. And then I've pinned to the top a poll that I just started a couple of hours ago to do with where do you see making money with free to play? What is it that you're going to offer to players to get them to spend some money and kind of incentivize them to kind of buy into the project?
So honestly, that you do not need to spend any money to play the game. There is a business model, and we're 100% open about it, and I will explain it in a moment. But our goal, is that anybody that wants to play a game should be able to do so without having to invest any monetary value in it. You don't have to buy an NFT. You don't have to buy a token. You don't have to. No entry barriers of such. You do have to invest your time if you do want to keep it 100% free. So you just play the game, and you can just get resources, you win resources, and then you use those resources to upgrade your cards, unlock new cards, buy new cards from other players, etc. Now, you asked a very good question: how do you make money? And the way that basically the company makes money is that we allow players to trade, right? And we make a fee out of those trading fees. So if you are selling a card to somebody in return for resources, then we take a very small percentage of that. And the second way method that we are currently will be generating when the game goes into production is so to play the game. When you play the game, you're actually playing on a battlefield. We try to introduce a randomizing effect into the gameplay. And this is not it impacts the gameplay itself. It impacts the experience that you're having, the visual experience, and also the audio experience. And the way that we do this is that we created a number on the map. If you go to Defiance.com, or if you scroll back down a little, or on the wiki Defiance.com, you can have you can see the map of the world. And on the map, we have a number of battlefields. And each battlefield is an NFT by itself, and it comes with game impact, meaning that it impacts the game itself in a way that you cannot foresee in advance, because you do not know which battleground you will be playing on. That is randomly selected by the game engine. So, for example, you could launch get on a battlefield that reduces all of your brawler units attack power by 2. And this means that if your deck is very brawler oriented, then that may have a negative impact on the outcome of your game that plays against you, right? But if you have a more mixed deck, then you could that could play in your favor and against your opponent, assuming that he has a more brawler-oriented deck. Now, the second thing that Battlefield does is that it changes the visual of the battlefield itself. So when you play the game, and let's say that you played on a ship, now you could be playing on a shore or on a mountain. And that basically is a means to give you a slightly different experience. So it's not every single game; it's the same boring experience. And the third thing that it does is that it also comes with a uniquely composed music. So every different battleground has a different music and a different track that you would be hearing when you play the game. Also, a means, an effort that we're trying to give you the players a different experience every single time, as much as possible. And lastly, the last thing that the battleground defines is the reward. So players play the game not only for fame, not only for experience, not only to grow, but also they win resources. Now, resources, day one, there's 0 resources in existence, and resources only get generated when 2 players actually play the game. And the entity that generates those resources are the battlegrounds itself, are those NFTs. And when you, assuming that you won the game, you take a portion of the majority of those resources that's your cash, basically. That's your war chest. Okay, you won that. The loser doesn't lose anything, assuming that he did not place a wager. You can wager against other players, and you only wager in resources, assuming that you want to place a wager. It's fully optional. And the battleground itself also takes a small fee, right? That's sort of a rent, if you will. Now, initially, we are the owners of the battleground, so that fee goes to us. Later down the road, as we introduce guild wars and guild tournaments, then some of those will be basically offered to as tournament rewards. But we'll still keep a significant portion for us, because that will be our main income stream. Everything else, we do not new NFTs. We do not sell them. New cards, we do not sell them. The way that we do is we basically auction them to players. Players come in, they place bids. The highest bid wins. The majority of those resources is it acts sort of like a sale, but the difference is that the majority of the resources actually get burned, and only the fee we do get the fee from that. So assuming that it's a 2% fee, then the 2% fee would basically go to us. The 98% of the resources would get burned. And that's basically the general business model.
Yeah, sorry, my phone locked and I couldn't get back to the button. No, I think that sounds really interesting, and it does seem that you've put loads of kind of different kind of aspects to the battleground itself. And it did, when you were mentioning how the different ones have different environments which can have different effects, that kind of leads me into one of the other questions I was thinking about with card games. And you kind of touched on it, not wanting the game to get stale. How are you going to combat the idea of a set deck becoming meta? It sounds like the Battleground is already going to kind of fix that problem, but how much thought have you put into trying to stop there being like one meta to rule them all?
So I think that's the way that the game is designed. It's specifically designed in a means to prevent that, meaning that every card has a counter card. And assuming that, let's say you have an amazing deck, right? You may still statistically have a superior deck to, let's say, whatever, 80%, 70% of people, but there will still be decks that, although they are weaker, they would be better against your specific deck, just because the composition of the cards would have a higher composition of cards that are basically countering your cards. The second part is the battlegrounds, which you mentioned, but and the third part, which is I think even more interesting, is the fact that we use NFTs, right? So let's assume that you're right. There's a deck which is meta, which is amazing and wins whatever 70-80% of the time. It's an amazing stat to have, right? How's everybody gonna get those cards? Right? The cards have a limited number of copies. So yeah, maybe a lot of grinders are people that grind the cards, then they're gonna be fighting for them and get them. But at some point, those cards are gonna run out. Assume that meta deck is not gonna be out of the weakest level of cards. That's highly unlikely, right? So probably is gonna be a significant number of cards which are, I don't know, legendary, mythic, epic, right? But those have very limited number of copies, and there's going to be a lot of people fighting and wanting those copies for themselves. So it's going to be very hard for a lot of players to get their hands on all of the cards that would make that meta deck. Possible, but very hard.
No, I think that makes sense. And then if there's only so many who can have the meta, you'll have slightly off meta decks, which then need their own counters compared to someone just trying to counter straight against the main meta deck. So that makes sense, and it does lead into another kind of question around kind of keeping it fresh. Card games are pretty much always adding new cards. How are you planning on adding new cards, and how do you see that affecting people who have been holding cards for a while? Because sometimes when you bring in new cards, old cards which used to be really good now suddenly aren't very good, and with them being NFTs, like you mentioned, you can see a sharp drop in the asset value for the holder if done incorrectly.
Yeah, it's a very good question. So we do not plan to add new cards to the different factions that exist. We do plan to add new factions. Now, again, new factions would need to be balanced, but they cannot be a way or a scenario where we introduce a new faction which is superior to our other faction. That kind of ruins the game for everybody, right? Everybody's just going to go for that faction, and okay, game over. So when we introduce a new faction, that's going to be obviously a long and a lot of testing going in there, but it's going to be mainly focused on being balanced first and foremost. In terms of refreshes, there's a lot of things that we can do to refresh, and we plan to do. And one of the things that is, for example, in Dfiance, you have cards, and we covered that, right? But I may not have mentioned that you can actually upgrade those cards. And in order to upgrade those cards, you need to, one, play the card. They need to gain experience. And two, you need to actually burn resources to upgrade your cards. Now, initially, this right now those cards are limited to level 6, which is a total of 5 upgrades. But a means to allow people to continue would be to increase the maximum level of the cards, so people could basically continue pushing forward without us creating disbalance by introducing some OP card. The second thing is that we technically can introduce different visual for the different card levels. That was initially also planned. It's just it's hundreds and thousands of cards, and believe me, every single card takes weeks to make properly. That does not include animations or anything. Um, so if assuming that the game is successful and people are hyped and everybody loves it, then definitely one of the things that we plan to do is um, as you progress through the game, as you upgrade your cards, you basically also get new animations and new visuals for your cards as you upgrade them.
I think that new visuals, kind of as you upgrade them, will definitely work as an incentive. Looking at the poll currently, the majority of people who voted that they would spend money in a free-to-play game have chosen kind of that cosmetic side. So people do value, even though it's not changing how they can play the game, just
We
having
have we
something to
have a
make it
lot of
look.
those, by the way. We have a lot of those. You have avatars which do have the way that your avatar looks does not impact in any way the game, but you can associate a leader ability to your avatar, and that impacts the game. Now, your avatar is an NFT, and you can actually put additional NFTs, additional items on it, and dress it. And basically, you could have an avatar on battlefield with an axe and a sword, or a shield, or a bow, or whatever. That would be basically customizing it. You could customize the way that your portrait, the way that your portrait looks, the frame of your portrait, the way that the back of your cards look. There's a lot of customization options that do not impact the game, but they do make your general player look much cooler and more epic.
No, I think that's a good thing, especially based on people seem to be going for the cosmetic side in the poll. Um, with the cards being upgraded and you needing to get experience on them by playing, when you trade cards with someone else, does the XP go with it, or does the new person have to start again with the XP?
No, the XP goes with it. It's an asset. It's an on-chain asset for all the reasons and all the goals of it. So, assuming that you sell a level 5 card, then you sold the level 5 card, and if it has 100 experience on it, then it has 100 experience on it.
No, that seems interesting, and I think that will come into some of the conversations that we've been having on Twitter around um, some people playing more and then selling what they've kind of been able to achieve in terms of that experience to people who maybe really want to play the game at a high level but just don't have the time to play. I know back in the day I used to play literally hours, and now most of the time I'm struggling to play up to double-digit hours in a week if I'm not careful with my time, just because of
Mhm.
busy dad life.
But
So I
I,
like
I
that
think
idea.
I think that what you mentioned is part of what makes a healthy financial ecosystem in Web3, right? There's people with money and there's people with time. Now, people with money may not have the same amount of time, but they still want to get a taste of endgame. No, they could come in and say, okay, I want to buy some high quality cards, or I want to buy some resources, and you can just go and buy them from other players that spend their time. They've spent a lot of time to grind, to upgrade those cards, to get them to their experience, etc. Right? And now you're paying them for their time. I think it makes perfect sense to me from an economics perspective. I think it also what could technically make Web3 games interesting. I played World of Warcraft for I think maybe 10 years or 8 years or something like that, right? And just one day out of the blue, I said, okay, enough. And I would have loved to sell my account, right? It was one of the most amazing accounts on one of the servers, but it was not a Web3. That was not possible. It was not even illegal to do so. So Web3 changes that.
No, yeah, and I think that obviously there's always the risk of kind of people coming in with the counter of pay to win. But I think for card games, it's not quite the same. In that there could be an aspect that you could build a really strong deck, but if you play like a potato, it doesn't really matter how strong your deck's been.
Yep. No, it
So
helps you. So
I think it
statistically
works for
speaking, it
cards.
helps you, right? But you're absolutely right. If you play bad, then you play bad.
Yeah, and I think that ties in well with the genre. I think there's certain games where you can't get away with anything like selling good equipment because it doesn't. That person's always then going to steamroll. But I think with card games, because of that strategy angle, you do okay kind of with doing it in that way. We are. Oh, go on, sorry.
I want to add on this that it's also, since you would be buying from other players, if players want to prevent that from happening, they could just not sell it. It's not like a centralized company which comes in and says, "Okay, I'm going to sell, uh, um, um, I'm going to sell an infinite number of this mythic card, right?" And everybody can come in and just play, as you say, pay to win, right? I just buy all the mythic cards and that's it. It's going to be one, highly unlikely for you to actually be able to buy so many cards. They're probably going to be expensive because if players going to have mythic cards or very rare cards, they're not likely going to be releasing them. There's going to be competition on them, and assuming that the players have a general they reject the idea of play to pay to win, then they could just decide not to sell those cards.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. And we're kind of drifting into the kind of competitive angle. And down in the audience, I see Nico, so I'm going to make sure I word this question correctly, because otherwise he's going to have a fit at me asking about esports. But how are you going to facilitate kind of competitive play in tournaments within the game?
Actually, we have tournaments upcoming in one of the maybe a month or a month and a half updates. So definitely tournaments. Definitely rating, player rating. You basically climb a ladder. We are going to be hosting tournaments in which you sign up, you use some resources, and then there's going to be whoever wins the tournament wins the resources, wins maybe some additional prize. We're going to have tournaments on standalone basis, right? Basically open for all, free world. But also going to have guild tournaments, inner guild tournaments, where you basically have a tournament that is hosted only for guild members, or a tournament that is basically between two different guilds. So Guild A would be fighting members out of Guild B. And those would be higher prizes and more interesting and more competitive, I think, games than just the open one.
No, I think that sounds good. Now, I like tournaments. You can't obviously force something to be an esports, but by hosting tournaments, you're definitely going to help it along the way. Are you going to have a spectate mode for tournaments and competitive play?
Yeah, absolutely. Further down the road for sure, but absolutely. Spectating tournaments is, from an esport perspective, then that's one of the things that people love to see the most, and definitely needed.
Well, hopefully I'll be able to watch some other people play before I try and jump into any tournaments, and maybe I'll stop being so bad. I think it's just generally card games. I think I'm too rash and just start throwing cards out. So I don't know. Maybe I need to slow down and get a bit more patience for it.
Now you can train against the AI.
Yeah, and now I can train against AI. Yeah, no, that's a good point actually. Final question, before we kind of move on to the next project. Where's the best place to get information about the project and follow you guys? What's coming up in the near future?
Best places is Twitter and Discord. We had some misunderstanding with Twitter. We had our account suspended, but now it's back. It's a Defiance game. And obviously on Discord, we're always available. We have Julia in there and myself. Just feel free to ping at any time. What's next? Next is a period about, I would say, 2, 3, maybe a little more months, during which we're going to start pushing as many updates as possible, try to get the game to the next level, introduce a lot of features that will be in the production that we want to test. And test as much as possible. And lastly, try to start finally building our community. Try to get some loyal players on, people that can help us design the game in a way that is interesting and fun for people to play, because that's at the end of the day, that's the goal, right? We want to build a game that's fun. That's why we didn't introduce a token. That's why we didn't do an NFT sale. We want the game to be first and foremost fun. So as many people as that want to be part of this journey, we are always open. We're more than happy to hear ideas, thoughts, feedback. That is very important for us, and that would be greatly appreciated. And that's the I would say short term goal, and then medium goals would be to start working towards the shifting of the assets to actually being decentralized, right? Right now, because everything is currently centralized, we want to shift them to for people to actually be able to take ownership over their assets as when we launch the game in production. And the goal is you want to own the assets, you want to have them on your wallet, and that's what we advocate for, and what we want to support, and we want to make sure that it works good, it's secure, and fast and cheap.
No, it all sounds exciting, and you heard it in the audience. Make sure you go and follow on Twitter, Discord, jump in and give it a go. See if you're better than me at playing cards. Spoiler, you probably will be. But no, thanks for coming and talking to us today. I know you're really busy, so really appreciate giving that time to come and talk about your game and explain it to us.
Thanks for having me.
No, that's fine. For those who've just joined us, welcome to Watch Your Game, episode 39. We've just heard from Dfiance, and we're going to move to our second project of Degenheim. So we will go to Degenheim for the big question, which is, what's your game?
Hey, greetings. Thanks for having us as well. My name's Milan. I'm the founder of Degenheim. And what's our game? We're basically building an ARPG with a rogue-like model, very similar to something, let's say, as Hades or Diablo or Path of Exile. However, much more casual and much less for heavy hardcore gamers. So maybe consider it with a mix of more casual games, just like Archero or Snaker, if I were to put it in a very short term.
That is very short term. And kind of, I'm going to jump onto one thing you said there, because I've got a prediction that I think casual games are going to be what gets Web3 mainstream, and hardcore games aren't, because they're already a niche. So I just don't see how that works numbers wise. What was the decision to go kind of more casual rather than going hardcore?
Exactly this. I found out that I am considered a heavy hardcore gamer, despite myself not considering myself being one, since I grew up on World of Warcraft, where you have had like 30 bindings, 7 macros, and all kinds of crazy stuff when you wanted to compete in the arena and in the battlegrounds and be like a top-notch player. And currently, most of the players want one-tap controls. Look at, for example, Vampire Survivors or Survivor.io, hugely successful games, which the only thing you do is you move around and you just pick up upgrades which mow down enemies on cooldown for you. And these games are basically crossing, I don't know, Survivor.io, I think, does $2.1 million a day in in-game purchases and ad revenue. So hence why we opted for this, because we wanted to basically make a game that is scalable, and we're basically making a hybrid between these the games that I mentioned, so that it's not way too casual, but it's not way too hardcore, something in the middle, so both parties find stuff of their own that is like 1-2 steps above casual, but there is also like some skill to be had if you want to progress. It's more of like a easy to learn and hard to master model. But before like we go to other questions, like please let me acknowledge the amount of good knowledge and good information Sebastian was dropping. you, my man, are possibly one of the most sane people I have heard on any gaming spaces. All the technical questions, all the game design things, all the preventing meta loadouts happening through battlegrounds and all the systems. That is exactly the same way we've had on many, many calls with our game designers. Hence why I know that like you've been dropping some mad knowledge. Huge props to you. Uh, I guess your game might be doing an amazing job just from what I have heard today. So kudos to you to doing that.
Appreciated.
No, that's good to hear. I like it when people like what people are answering. I think it's always good to. I don't know. I'm trying not to throw any shade in directions when I try and think of my answer. I like to talk to people who know what they're talking about with their game. So I was happy with the answers as well, and hopefully we'll be happy with your answers because so far you've dropped a ridiculous length of games that you're throwing out there. So we're definitely avoiding some of the problems I had really early on with the space where I would, because it was like just the tail end of the bull where you talk to people who've just pivoted into gaming and maybe have never even played a computer game, which made talking about a computer game they're building quite challenging. So it's nice that you've already started just reeling off a whole list of games that you're kind of interested in with it. Just kind of before we jump into how the game plays and what it looks like for a player, whereabouts are you guys in development at the moment?
Currently, we hope to finally arrive at a closed beta because we always have envisioned a gradual release schedule of the game, which because some games are notoriously famous for doing the mistake of like, oh, we think the game is ready, boom, they publish it and give it to everyone, which usually ends up very, very badly. And what we wanted to do is basically do as much internal testing, as much internal balancing ourselves. Hence why I absolutely understood what Sebastian was talking about, because like we're currently in the middle of it. We're basically doing 2 to 3 balancing tests every single day, weekends included, where the whole team plays it. We go through it. We tinker around with all the numbers, damages, progression, with the core gameplay loop, movement, items, like whatever you can imagine that currently is in the game, and just trying to close it out to make it as according to our imagination as possible, because we're basically didn't want to rush the thing. We didn't want to just like, oh, throw out the game and show people like, oh, here's something playable. We don't think that is the way to do it. Like proper games usually have a lot of internal testing. Then you do like a closed beta, public beta. Then you do like a big soft launch phase, and then you move on to a global launch. And that is something we're trying to achieve. So yeah, we're basically very shortly before closed beta when we finally give it to play to some of our holders, possibly some of our partners' holders as well, because we promised people that the buyers of our NFTs will get early access, despite us later on definitely moving towards free to play and being absolutely public with no entry barrier.
Yeah, you've come up with a couple of questions just on what you said there, but the last point something I actually want to pick up on is I think sometimes there's 2 routes to do with the kind of testing, and I've seen both work and both fail, to do with whether you are completely open about testing, so you just let anyone come in and play, or whether it is more maybe either holders of the NFT or people who've filled in some sort of application form. And I think the pros and cons kind of are quite hard to balance for it. I've been moving slightly more in favor of games which are a little bit more restricted in regards to testing, but only because of imagining what the project might be getting in terms of feedback. That sometimes if it's open to everyone, your feedback quality can go right down and you have to wade through bad feedback where they're either trying to game the game so they end up getting more out of it, or they just don't understand what a testing of a game is and they're just complaining about things which are obvious complaints. It's not really helping with the development. So I think it's quite an interesting thing to consider is how you test it with the community.
First and foremost, I do love the fact that it obviously shows that you are really passionate and equally knowledgeable about this thing, because I couldn't agree more with these points. You can do both sides of testing, and at some points you always want to do both, because if you do smaller testing batches, which I have also experience with outside of gaming, since I made a lot of UX and customer experience optimizations in multiple industries, whether it was healthcare, government services, e-commerce, startups, software as a service, and so on, and usually want to do both. The first one, having a small group, allows you to go very deep, have something very targeted. You can iterate a lot of faster, and it gets you much more control of the testing, and you can go after things you want to test, especially if you do guided tests, but also even if you do unguided tests. However, the latter, which is basically having testing phases where the a big chunk of public can test, usually leads up to much more qualitative feedback. And usually when you want to have proper testing, you want to have both quantitative feedback. You want to have both qualitative feedback and also quantitative feedback, which is like basically best of both worlds, and putting them together to arrive at best possible data. However, it can easily get out of hand, as you mentioned. And most importantly, doing quantitative testing with a high quantity of people eats up a tremendous amount of your time. Because imagine if you can deeply work with, I don't know, 10, 15, 20, 50 people and getting feedback from them, and suddenly you have 1,000 people. Now imagine 1,000 people and give you feedback, and all of the feedback is between 5 to 25 paragraphs. That is a tremendous amount of just like going through the feedback, processing it, reading it, understanding it, piling it up together, aggregating it, and then basically doing something from the feedback. Hence why I also steer, especially in the beginning and in the early tests, more towards like have a small group, do both targeted and both controlled testing and uncontrolled testing, and see where this goes, and iterate fast, with emphasis on iterate fast, iterate quickly. It's some knowledge from a lot of good startup founders, is like good teams fail fast. You want to arrive at failure so many times during testing, finding out like this doesn't work, this is bad, this is shit, this is awesome, and one step at a time you always go forward, arriving at a better solution every single day, sometimes even multiple times a day. Hence why even games which are currently multi-million-dollar enterprises and are live and have millions and millions of players, some of them are doing balancing even multiple times a day, just because that is the way gaming actually works. So I am completely in line with what you said.
And then just before I move back to a couple of questions about the game as well, I would definitely recommend for you guys or anyone out there that I did some play testing with a group called G7 DAO. You might have seen them on Twitter. They've got some funds going on as well. And there was a whole group of us doing play testing, doing forms, like to give more quality feedback. So I would definitely recommend keeping an eye out for any testing groups like that that are known for giving good feedback. I ended up running out of time, so I had to kind of dip out slightly, unfortunately. But the feedback that was being given was of kind of a good standard. So picking up people who, I'm sure there's a few in the audience I've spotted who do kind of make it their thing to go out and test games, definitely does help with that kind of side of things. Circling back around to the game, you mentioned kind of the casual side, and then some of the games you were mentioning, ones for mobile. What platform's the game going to be on?
Currently, we're aiming mostly on PC. Later on, if it's possible and is actually feasible, we want to spread out to make it cross-platform also on console. And basically, we want to have a very similar approach, just for example, what Riot is doing with League of Legends, which is a genius approach, that you actually build a franchise which has one big pillar standing, and then you basically create surrounding titles and spin-offs of that for multiple platforms, for multiple purposes, to basically have the most market coverage. And basically that is something what we're doing. And why we went for PC is the fact that it's the least, let's say, regulated. Not for the fact that like, oh, we want to rock cool people and do a scam. More of a thing that we don't want to end up in a situation when someone is grabbing us by the balls and suddenly we're stuck. because look at, for example, the iOS updates from Apple, which I don't know, I think it was iOS 14, which basically was like, okay, blockchain gaming, if anything, blockchain related unlocks any game content, you're automatically delisted, especially since it was minted before, which many projects are the case. And if you want to sell blockchain items and NFTs through the game, we're taking the 30% cut. And that is like, that is big. That is hefty. That's basically like that's basically a whole company gatekeeping you by taking ransom from you, and we have seen this in the history. I don't know whether you remember, there were multiple projects, quote unquote, calling like, "Oh, we're building our metaverse on Minecraft," and I was like face palming the shit out of my head because I was like, this is not going to end well, and this is not a metaverse, and you're either unknowledgeable or straight up lying to people. And guess what happened? One day Minecraft was like, oh, NFTs are banned from the game, boom, and your metaverse is gone. Hence why we wanted to do this on PC, because even if everyone bans you out, on PC you have the ability to go direct to consumer. Here's the client, download the game, go play. There's no App Store to gatekeep you. There's no Google Play to gatekeep you. Even if everyone suddenly decided like, oh, we're not supporting blockchain gaming and NFTs, you can still do your game, and that was basically the biggest way of how to de-risk the fate of the game, basically taking a sideways turn due to external sources you cannot influence by any means.
No, I think that's definitely a good reason. Like the Apple cut is huge, and the sudden change can really affect a business's kind of plan as they go through. Personally, I'm kind of hoping that some rich games do it to introduce more people to NFTs, and they're like the sacrificial lambs who accept that they've lost 30%. But I kind of understand that the majority of projects don't have the kind of funds to be able to accept losing 30% of it. And even then, they can then change other aspects of the terms of services, because they do essentially have a monopoly over what can be played on those games. So definitely understand avoiding that risk and going kind of
Yeah,
PC.
absolutely. Especially if you imagine it for a space we currently are in, right, where people are blur farming tokens and not paying any, or choose not to pay any royalties to projects, which usually is like what 2.5 to 5% per project. And now imagine these people having to pay 30% extra, so the developers actually make means, right? That is a huge cut. So I can potentially see someone like being very hesitant or unwilling to be paying these, because if I'm a developer and I know that I have to make this amount of money to make the game sustainable, and suddenly someone tells you like, oh, we're taking 30% of it, and you'll be like, okay, I gotta raise the prices by 30%, and suddenly it might be too hefty for the common player to actually purchase it.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think it's always quite a risk of trying to balance how many people you get in, but at the same time being profitable enough to actually kind of survive as a project. And I think that's something. I'm going off on loads of tangents. I keep meaning to come back to the game, but I think that's something that came out in one of the polls I did recently. I've been loving polls recently, where asking the space in general how many games they think make it out of early access from Steam. And in the end, the majority picked 0 to 25%, which is the right answer. But there was people picking 75 to 100% of games make it out of Steam early access successfully, which I think shows a misunderstanding of the work that projects having to put in, but then also the challenges and barriers that just crop up out of everywhere. So a sudden 30% can really derail a project if they were already on kind of the edge of a knife anyway. In terms of, so I'm on the computer, load up the app. What am I doing? What's my goals? Who am I in the game? Kind of give me a visual picture of what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm. So basically, we're working on multiple playable characters. So you'll be able to choose who you want to play according to your play style, and the number of characters will be growing. So there will be a wide variety of play styles. And since it's a roguelike game, the game basically never offers you the same playthrough, or the statistical and mathematical chances of this happening actually are close to zero. And because like you jump into the game, the environments are changing, you have like various battlegrounds, just as, for example, Sebastian mentioned. You have the game basically consists. We're currently working also on a map, which basically lines out you traversing through it and progressing through an environment. That environment consists of multiple biomes. Let's name them chapters, and these chapters have multiple stages you go through, and the environments throughout this change, which also are very dynamic. You can have traps there and so on, and very different mechanics, differently outlined obstacles, which inherently force you to change your playstyle. You throw into it multiple playable characters, the roguelike genre of having always very randomized upgrades throughout the run you are in, which you are getting, forcing you also to play sometimes very meta builds, sometimes very off meta builds, and that's basically the experience. And then you throw on top of it, but this is basically the core gameplay loop, which is very similar, as I said, to something between, let's say, Hades and Archero. And then on top of it, you have a lot of meta progression, right? Which people do think, and many people have the mistake that like AAA graphics and amazing combat keeps the game going, and it's like, yeah, but why are match 3 or match 3 combat games generating $3 billion, right? Like, is it amazing combat or amazing graphic? No, it's usually the casual gameplay coupled with meta progression, which roguelike and roguelite games definitely excel on. So you do progress inside the run, but you also harvest the resources you have from the run, whether you succeed or die, because also dying is progress, which is the beauty of roguelike and roguelite games, which is even by performing very, very poorly, you are still advancing in the game, but at a much slower pace than other players. And suddenly you throw onto this permanent upgrades such as talents, then also an inventory for the character where you kit your character out to suit your playstyle more, and a lot of stuff I'm not spoiling yet. So basically that is the gaming experience we are currently having and currently testing out. On this path, you meet a lot of enemies. Currently, we have, I think, 40 new enemies implemented during the last 2 weeks, fully rigged, animated, developed with visual effects, everything absolutely functional. And I think currently we're sitting on 7 or 9 bosses, which are like very, very epic and stacked boss fights. I might pin 2 videos into the space, because we basically also have released actual gameplay footage, which is not like we faked it in Blender whatsoever. That is 100% playable footage, recorded inside the game directly by me from playing. You can see the UI and stuff happening there. We also have like full breakdown of abilities, attacks, movements, and so on of the bosses, so people can actually see how the bosses are dynamic. With the bosses, we just went all in. We went super spectacular, because I don't know who doesn't love an epic boss fight. And one of the bosses is basically a boss not connected to anything. The second boss, which we already published, is a boss fight related to our partners, which is Gangster All Star. They have 2 amazing characters, which you basically combine into a very unique boss fight, where the boss fight is basically divided into 3 phases. The first phase is one of the bosses fighting you, which is a predominantly fast melee character chasing you. The second phase is more of a hybrid / ranged character, which is more avoiding you and keeping distance. And the third phase is 2 of them at once, which are very complementary, creating a very unique dynamic. And currently, I think tomorrow we should have more content ready of our third boss, which also will be a boss connected to some very notable names. Whether it's an individual or a project, I won't tell. And there are more on the way. So we will have a lot of bosses basically consisting of some notable names from the space. And additionally to that, once you are like fighting your way to the boss, you also meet mini bosses on the path there, which basically serve like a extra level of gatekeeping, where you have to show your skill and advance and progression in the game. So you're actually required to progress in the meta progression, so that you can actually progress throughout the game.
And I have just pinned that video to the top as well for anyone in the space.
Thank you.
It looks really clean. I like it. It looks really cool. In it, I'm assuming it's single player. Is there any elements of multiplayer, or how does it all tie together?
Currently, it's single player, and also explain why. We want to deliver a pleasant experience, and usually when you do multiplayer, you want to have a pleasant experience, and a pleasant experience in multiplayer actually hardly and like very heavily relies on good netcode, good servers, and good matchmaking. And the prerequisite of good matchmaking is actually having extensive and proper analytics. And for extensive and proper analytics, you want to have a big enough player base, which actually has a lot of variety in it. Because if you have a player base which is predominantly, I don't know, let's say whales and very proficient players, and there are a few noobs or new gamers, they won't have a pleasant experience. And unless you check all these boxes, it is near impossible to deliver an enjoyable multiplayer experience, whether it's co-op or whether it's PvP. And I'll explain you why. Which it comes down to the fact that if you don't have enough players, it's hard to match them properly. And one of two things or both happen. First, the queues are extremely long, and nobody wishes to stay in the queue for 5 to 10 minutes or whatsoever to get matched. Or you get matched improperly, where you get matched, for example, new players are matched with players which are like already geared up and whatsoever. And in PvP, it just leads to snowballing. The experienced players don't see the challenge and they get bored of the game. The new players get wrecked 9 of the 10 times, and they hate the game, and both of them are leaving. And suddenly you're bleeding players. You're trying to basically compensate on this with more spend on marketing and user acquisition. So you're bleeding players and bleeding money, and that in gaming usually is called the death of a game. And hence why we wanted to do it in a much different approach, which is a approach which we are basically, we took huge inspirations from successful games and successful brands. Just as you, for example, mentioned of like how many games actually make it out of early access on Steam. Well, look at, for example, on Hades. Hades was on early access, I think, for 1 year. And during that 1 year, they already had 700,000 paying players, which paid 15 to $20 for the game as an unfinished game. They listened to their community, listened to their players, they implemented the feedback, they used the analytics, they balanced out the game, and then after 1 year, they were like, oh, this is version 1.2 or 1.0 or 1. Whatever, and then they even released updates for the game as well, and look at what a huge success the game was. Same with, let's say, as I mentioned, Archero. If you compare Archero now and Archero when it was in soft launch, Archero didn't have multiple playable characters, it didn't have live ops, it didn't have special events, special offers, disc progression, it didn't have many other progressions, it didn't have idle farming, like basically 90% of the features that Archero currently has, which makes Archero, weren't there, and they weren't there for very, very long. And we want to basically make the same. We want to have the game, first and foremost, single player, where you are not dependent on having anyone else to be able to enjoy the game. Later on, I would very, very, very much love to see co-op, because I'm a huge sucker for co-op games. Like I'm like split screen gaming on an old TV on Sega or whatsoever, or on an old PC playing Golden Axe or whichever game you can imagine. That is my childhood, so I have a deep, deep love for co-op games. And even we have in our roadmap PvP, which we want to introduce later on down the road. Once the game has solid fundamentals, it has a big enough player base, it's properly balanced, and it checks all the boxes, like, okay, we now might think of actually implementing PvP so that people actually have an enjoyable experience, rather than just like, oh, this is shit, I hate the game, I'm going to leave. Because that happens. You irritate players long and heavily enough, and they leave. And you don't want to play with this fire, because that might kill your game.
And I'm glad you mentioned Arturo, because I played that loads and I'd completely forgot its name. And then someone was showing me a game a couple of days ago that someone's building, and they were showing it, and I was thinking, this looks exactly like a game I played on mobile. And for the life of me, I couldn't remember what the name of it was. And I've just Googled it then, and the picture, that's exactly the one I was thinking of.
Yeah, and I don't know whether you have noticed, but actually Doom, which everybody knows is a huge franchise, released their own clone of Archero on mobile very recently, and it's performing fairly well.
It's a good game. I really liked it. I played it.
Yeah,
I can't remember. Yeah.
like it is much more casual than I would like. Hence why I was extremely skeptical. When I was jumping into Archero. Because I was like, oh, one finger controls, you don't aim shit. I was like, I'm not liking this because I'm a huge sucker for aiming skill shots and being a very, very skill based game. And I jumped into it, and man, I was hooked. Like I was grinding it like every day until I think 11th chapter or something like that. Also on heroic mode and special events and whatsoever. And there I actually saw like, okay, you make a game even more casual than you would like. You slap on proper meta progression, because Archero thrives on a thing that it's very easy to learn. It has an unfolding onboarding experience, because like when you jump into the game seems that it's hyper casual almost. Like you basically don't do anything. And the game continuously introduces you to new stuff. Like you run through the game, you die a lot, and suddenly you arrive like, oh, talents, upgrade your character, boom, 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 boom. And I go, ooh, first item, ooh, items, cool. Bam, 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 more items, boom, pets, this, that. And suddenly the game is like unfolding continuously, and you have new stuff coming out to you. And suddenly the game doesn't feel as casual as it felt in the beginning, but you had the most seamless experience, and suddenly you have a very, very seamless learning process of the core gameplay loop, which basically function as a feeding mechanism for the meta progression, where the meta progression is actually what keeps the retention of the game alive. And hence why we made the huge pivot from a very, very hardcore game to something in the middle, because we're seeing the success of Archero. Like Archero is still generating a ton of money for years, and it has outlived many, many other games, and it's very appealing to very different audiences. Like older people play Archero, younger people play Archero. Core gamers can play Archero, but also very casual gamers can play Archero, and this is like, it is the best of both worlds. And if you consider the blueprint for the meta progression that Happy has been doing, which is the publisher, look at, for example, Snaker, which is their other game, that is basically that they took a game from another studio with a good enough core gameplay loop, then slapped on their meta progression blueprint, and it functions basically the same as Archero. The core gameplay loop is the feeding mechanism for the meta progression that actually keeps you there for weeks and months to stay, and that is basically what we are implementing in Degenheim as well, to make it a scalable experience that hopefully lasts and retains players for a long period of time.
No, that sounds really good, and I think it's a good area to kind of aim for. I think anything you do to restrict your audience right now is, well, going to restrict your audience, obviously, but we're such a small audience to start with that you need to try and attract more people, and even some people who wouldn't call themselves gamers, and then they start getting involved in some of the more mobile ones of a similar style, and then go, actually, I quite like this, and it starts kind of drifting across. I think that's going to be a key way of getting more people.
Amen. I couldn't agree more. And if anyone disagrees, look at the new Battlefield. AAA graphics, huge studio, and the game isn't performing well because just the entry point barrier is like nobody can afford the hardware to run the game smoothly. Hence why they have a very diminished player base. Hence why there's not enough adoption. So absolutely agree with what you said.
And yeah, it's been really good to hear about the game. The kind of last questions. Where's the best place to find about the game? Where's the best place for people to follow you? And what's kind of next on the roadmap for people to get excited about?
So usually Twitter and Discord. I do have to sadly admit that we have been more silent than I'm happy about, but we're just like working around the clock. However, we want to better show people what we were doing during the last months. Also, I already explained it on multiple spaces and events, the pivot and the reasoning behind it. However, we, for example, want to start publishing either a bi-weekly or monthly update of like a devlog of like what is everything that we did, like document, like here are the enemies, here are the bosses, here is this, here is that, here are these mechanics, so that people can actually understand. And so yeah, possibly Degenheim's official Twitter is a good start, and also Discord. And then we will be publishing those devlog updates on Medium, so actually people will have the multitude of information, so they could actually choose their preference. Like if you consume content on Discord, you'll have it there. If you prefer Twitter, you'll have it there. If you want a huge as Medium article so you can like dive deep, feel free. Like all this is basically currently getting streamlined in our content creation pipeline, where we're trying to prepare a lot of overhead of the content so we can like post continuously, so people have a continuous stream of information of what has been happening, what is happening, and what will be happening.
Okay, no, that sounds good. And everyone, you've heard that. Make sure you go and follow and keep an eye out for It Develops. Definitely have a look at those videos I've pinned and the ones on the Twitter, because I think they look really clean. So
Yeah.
definitely worth going to go have a look at.
Yeah, one thing I always want to encourage, which we have and always had, like even pre-mint from the very beginning of Degenheim basically emerging from the shadows, is we have a channel where people can ask directly me, and I always try to answer a lot of questions, whether it's in long or short copy, so that people are actually like to their satisfaction, so that they do have proper understanding. Just like I, for example, do it here in Spaces. If someone asks something, I always try to answer as to the best of my abilities, so people do have proper understanding of what we are doing. So even if someone, for example, doesn't want to read up on a lot of stuff or whatsoever, feel free to hop in there, throw me a question. Sooner or later, I will definitely answer it.
No, and thanks again for giving us your time. I know everyone's really busy, so it's been great to hear about the project. Someone mentioned it on one of my tweets where I was asking who should be a guest, who should we speak to, and you guys got mentioned, and then loads of people mentioned it. So I'm really glad to have got the chance to speak to you about the game. Hope that
I think we should be the ones that should be glad that people considered us worthy of being on your platform, and you consider us being worthy on your platform. So the pleasure is all ours.
Yeah, thanks again. And then thank you to everyone in the audience as well. I know we've been going for nearly an hour and a half at this point, and even people in the audience, some of the faces I'm recognizing, I know that you guys are really busy. So really appreciate you coming out and listening to the different projects that we're introducing here. Again, I've pinned to the top a list which will have all of the projects that we've covered in the series, so you can follow them on Twitter and find out what they've been doing. We are booked for the next 4 weeks with a variety of different projects. So do come back next week to get introduced to new games. I will be posting videos of new games that I've been playing recently onto YouTube. This space, for those who've missed it, will be available on Twitter, YouTube, hopefully by tomorrow, and Spotify by tomorrow as well. So you'll be able to catch up on the two projects there. But thanks again for everyone who's come out. And as you go out there looking for new games, make sure that you look for games that you enjoy. And I'll catch everyone in a bit. Thanks all.
Thank you, guys. See you next time.
Thank you very much for having us as well. It was a pleasure.